Hello. So I'm going to do a video for every single Enneagram fixation. This is based on Oscar Ichazo's fixations. This isn't from later authors, but I am going to explain every fixation um, in terms of other authors and how it relates, because I've spoken with people over the years about this, over the past few years, especially since Chazo's books were published and more information came to light about that occulted material. And I just got the sense that people don't realize that they're the same types. The language is different, the names are different, and people who are familiar with later literature look at Chazo's material and they say, wait, what happened? The types have been, confused, they've been moved around, they're different, and they get confused, they don't understand, they don't put it together. So that's why I'm doing these videos. I want to break down each one of Chazo's fixations in terms of the ego X and the over X, which are two really simple ways of breaking down each fixation as a kind of a cycle that perpetuates itself. So if you can break down these two core features and understand really what they are, then you'll see where the types came from and how this whole thing started. So I'm actually going to start with type 2. Reason for starting with 2, just because I guess I could start with the gut triad, but I'm going to start with 2. And 2 is a good place to start because the 2 on the surface, in terms of the names that were used, it really doesn't resemble the later 2 that well. So it's a good place to start to teach people, how this thing operates. All right, so 2 is the over-independent. So that's the thing they overdo is independence, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And their ego fixation is on flattery. So it's ego, flattery, and over-independence. So for the 2, what you need to understand is that they flatter others. Flattery can also show up as helping, right? So we have to understand kind of what's behind the superficial definition of the word we're looking at here. So with the 2, their flattery is positive attention towards others. It could be helping, it could be serving, all of the things that we understand the 2 is doing. That's what we look for. And it's correlated with the capital sin of pride. So you can see how that goes. They feel good about themselves, and partly it's because they're good people, right? They're flattering others, they're here for you, and that's kind of at the core of the 2 fixation. Okay, and what about the over-independence aspect? This confuses people. It's generally you wouldn't hear a 2 described as independent. So it's extremely important that we grasp what this means. The independence of the 2 functions, the ego X and the over X are almost a conversation, a dichotomy. They go back and forth. They create like this self-perpetuating trap for each fixation, and it's just this cycle that we get lost in. It's really always a contradiction, is what you need to understand here. So with the 2, it's that the over-independence means they're not really that independent. They want to be independent, and they establish or sort of project their so-called independence in order to show up for others, as if to say, look, I don't need anybody, I'm all good here, and in fact I'm going to help you. All right, so there are things being missed here with the 2. In this fixation, they feel the need to be independent on the one hand, but they're really not independent at all. It's like their independence needs to be shown off to other people in such an extreme way as to go overboard and help the other person, such that it starts to look very suspicious. Okay, so that's kind of what the 2 is like. Here are people that show up in others' lives, unwanted, unannounced, doing things they weren't asked to do, giving you compliments sometimes that feel over the top, giving you help that feels misplaced, intruding on your life, And meanwhile, at the same time, often saying, well, I don't need anything, right? They'll say, I'm good, you don't need to help me, I'm just here for you. So that's kind of the two in a nutshell. Ichazo nailed it. It's not that Ichazo nailed it like he studied this stuff for 50 years and then he came up with the answer. No, he came up with this first. Okay, so that's why he nailed it. It's that other people diverged from his original vision, and that's logic and that's history and that's how this functions on a chronological timeline. Okay, so these are the core fixations for given people, right? So when you're trying to figure people out, trying to figure their fixation out, look for what really drives them on a deeper level. Now, if the person has a habit of flattering people, showing up in somebody else's lives, helping, doing this pride thing, and meanwhile having an over-independence about them. The two tends to be a bit independent. They like to do their own thing. They often have their own agendas, right? They're independent in helping you. They just kind of are there. Often they're ready. They don't necessarily have a lot of needs of their own. So that's how the independence manifests, okay? So once you can get past those naming differences, you'll understand that the type was understood simply, and there really wasn't a loss of understood. There really wasn't a change in the types over the years. It was just a change in language and an understanding of the fixations. They are talking about the same thing. The descriptions, of course, go every which way. They're just interpretations on how they can play out in a given individual. So some authors very much favor, more flowery descriptions of the two and what they're like. Others focus more on the underlying dynamics and fixational features. The point is that if it has two in front of it and it's Enneagram, it's talking about this same fixation, this same type. So, if you look at a few things, let's unpack a few more connections to later authors' work. For example, the two is in what's called the rejection triad that you'll find in Riso and Hudson. Very, very popular authors. Interesting, systematic way of understanding the types. So the two is in the rejection triad. You can see how this follows from their over-independent stance, right? That's where the rejection piece really fits into it. They feel independent from others. They don't feel connected to others. They kind of reject relationships with others first, which is strange for the two because they push away first, but then they pull you in. It's both things. They're contradictions again. So we've got a complicated situation with the two. They're a rejection type. The flattery, of course, the flattery, the pride, this other aspect, these ego, the vice, the passion, and also the ego process here, the fixation is something positive, right? I mean, pride is a positive emotion towards yourself. Okay, so they're a positive outlook type, right? This is where we see some of these elements being recombined. So, yeah, they're a positive outlook type. Of course, they're also a superego compliant type, is another triad we find them in. And, this piece doesn't fit as well with Ichazo's early material because he talked about superego positions for all of the types, that everybody has a superego, right? So these were some mixed messages between the authors. If you're going to use superego, we all have the superego. It's something from Freud, right? The way of understanding 1, 2, and 6 as superego compliant types was like using the superego as a metaphor for the fact that these people are compliant to ideals. I don't think it holds up with the two as well. Honestly, I don't think that all of the triads and so forth from Riso and Hudson necessarily tie in that directly with the core material. With the two, you can see it though in the fact that they're helping other people. Okay, so they're compliant towards something that's more positive, other-oriented. That being said, I don't think that necessarily that triad holds up as well. I think that sometimes they became a little bit too ambitious, wanting to fit everybody into groups of 3 and coming up with little, pseudo patterns and applying patterns onto it so that they could come up with their new marketable tool. And Riso and Hudson's version of the Enneagram was the most successful model, I believe. To my knowledge, they sold the most books. They were the most successful in disseminating it, partly because it had these tidy little, flashy things in there that make some sense, but some of them, are too much. Some of them don't work. For example, I'm a type 8, which most people wouldn't even think. They would just contradict me and try to make my life hell, which is depressing, of course, because I live, with this fixation and know what it's like. But most people might try to paint me as a compliant type because I focus on high morals, right? Which is actually the 8. But you see, it caused problems later on, some of these divergences, and it led to contradictions later on. So there's kind of a fine line there between understanding the contradictions and then understanding the common threads and being able to move forward and say, look, these types were already in place early on. So what happened and what's confusing about later authors' treatments of them, if they're confusing, then it's probably because there were some contradictions. I personally don't necessarily like having to hear that anybody with a superego that has morals is supposed to be a compliant type. I think that's not so great. The positive outlook type triad, I think, works fine for the 2 because of that flattery and that other-oriented approach. I think that works okay. And I think the rejection works fine with, the over-independence and kind of they're separate from you and they're just here helping you and they don't have needs. All right. And okay, so they're in the heart triad. That was there. That's one of the core features. The names tend to be different. Ichazo called it relations, the relation triad, which is all about relationships, right? It's about connecting with other people. That's why they use flattery. They focus on, their independence so that they can help you. They're in the relations triad, and it was understood as a heart in this center of the body, that you could feel these sensations and these experiences in the body, in the heart center. So for a 2 and for any heart type, look for a heart pumping hearts. The heart rate accelerates, your breathing changes. Literally, this is what Ichazo identified, or what some of the early masters really believed. And one way they developed this system was by linking these fixations to places in the body. So, and we all cycle around the trifix through those different centers. So with the 2, I would expect a good bit of tension in the chest and the emotions coming out, through the breathing and heart rate and everything. But it was understood as the emotional triad, in the heart center. It's to do with relating to other people and those relationships. So the 2 is very much, a member of that triad, and that didn't change much. You can read about that. It's consistent, through all the authors. So, and there's a lot more. That's just doing ego X and over X. If you read Ichazo, there's, a couple dozen ego processes, and a good bit of the material was maintained. Some of it was lost by the wayside, but you have to realize that was just kind of entropy and information science, the way this carried out over time. It's nothing. The point is that those types really are already preserved. They can be preserved from their early iterations. And the more we get away from that and think that these are fundamentally different types, it's completely backwards. It's putting the cart before the horse. That leads people to then want to reject the old, reject, however many decades of work. By the time Ichazo had this back in the 1950s, he'd been studying it. This was his life's work to put together this system. So it's important to acknowledge that and to realize that there are other hands in the pot that got a hold of it, all of his students, and then they wanted in on it. They wanted to make money. They wanted to take it, in new directions, but it was sabotaging it in a way because they had to change the names. They had to change it. They had to come up with new ideas. They had to do a spin-off version, and now we have a really broken Enneagram community. People don't agree on the types. They don't they have completely different methods of doing everything. It's perpetuated all these toxic personalities and dynamics in the Enneagram community, and it's just become very, very challenging to work with this system in its original format. It was a spiritual, psychological, esoteric tradition early on, and it's turned into something really like barely functional, that can barely even be used in many of its iterations, because you just have all these different authors trying to, you know, reinvent the wheel basically and throw away all this core material that was really the source of everything else, but they're pretending like it doesn't exist. Some people do talk about the traditional Enneagram, and that's fine, but there's just this lack of recognition about how important it is, and then you get these very like generic, vague, stereotyped renditions of the types and what they're like, and you could look for hours at the types and not really be able to decide, you know, what your type is, and you might decide, and then you might go back to each other and go, well, I don't even know if I feel I'm the same type in both of these. So the first thing is to make sure that you are the same type in all versions, to be able to see that type and how that type really is the core of you. You know, I'm a type 8, and that's something that I've come to understand on a deeper level by studying Ichazo and studying that core material and that core dynamic. You know, that what really gets me is justice and vengeance. So the 8 is ego. Might as well talk about the 8 a little bit. The 8 is ego, vengeance, right? And over justice, the over justice maker, also known as the moralist. So the cycle with the 8, again, like the 2 or any of the types, it's a cycle that goes back and forth, a kind of a contradiction, a trap, a spiral that we get caught up in. Now, the 8 focuses on injustice. You know, how am I being treated unfairly? What's not right in this situation? And they can be very entitled about it. You can have an 8 that's in a relatively good situation, you know, where they have power, they have wealth, they have influence, everything's going well for them, and they look at some little tiny thing and say, you know, where are my scissors or something, you know, or, oh God, I can't believe you didn't tidy up, you know, the house or something, and they can then start raging about it, you know, and they can get very harsh and aggressive and want to get revenge about that over a small thing. They can become vengeful over just about anything that they feel is unjust. It tends to be their own personal variety of justice, because most of us are not in a position where we are, you know, politicians looking after people and spearheading some justice movement. I mean, often it's focusing on getting what's theirs in their life, you know. So the 8 is constantly spiraling with this, constantly. And they can go down the levels of health very quickly by getting this distorted vision of justice for themselves and looking around and saying, you know, I'm getting a raw deal in my life. This isn't fair. That's what justice is about for the 8. It's about getting what you want out of life, living life to the fullest, often having high morals and things being supposedly fair and just for everybody. Of course, it's distorted. It's not objective. It's something within us. And they have very strong convictions about when something is right and when it's wrong. They have convictions about when things are the way they want them to be and when people are getting what they want. So this idea of justice, of everything being fair and good in the universe, is something they're constantly reacting to. It's a little bit like the 1 with perfection, but with the 8, it's really about getting what they're entitled to, what they feel they have a right to. That's what justice is. There's getting what's fair, you know. And then when they perceive injustice, which they constantly do, right? You always are perceiving this thing. So they're constantly perceiving injustice because they're looking for it. And then they feel the need to react with some form of vengeance, okay? Now, vengeance is just a reaction to that. It's basically who's to blame and what are we going to do about it, right? How are we going to get them back? some of the time, the 8 often takes it internally and says, well, I'm the problem here, right? I'm being punished. I'm in a bad situation. So I'm punishing myself, or I need to be hard on myself, and they'll beat themselves up. It's described by Chazo. So they'll beat themselves up, and they'll go take drugs, or they'll go make their life into a living hell and punish themselves because they deserve it, right? They did this themselves. Okay, so you'll get some of that. You'll also usually get the opposite with the 8, which is they'll try to punish the other person, right? I mean, they're angry. They want direct, open revenge at you because of what you did. And they'll often identify that quickly and pick up on that and want to shove it back in your face immediately and say, no, this is not right. Take this back, fix this. So you get both ways with the 8. Any 8's going to identify with both of those styles of vengeance. It's played out to me personally what I did. It's also playing out with what you did, and sometimes a third party, right? So there's kind of a dispersion of revenge and justice on the responsible parties, and the desire to have this grand vision and access to justice and the ability to seek vengeance for that. And that is what cycles the 8. And this could look like them just living a regular life, and then one day having a blow up with somebody, and their life gets bad quickly, right? They can, because their blow ups, their vengeance is so powerful, their desire, it's so over the top, they can get carried away with it. They could just be kind of steamrolling through life, feeling happy, feeling good, feeling grand, all the things that the 8 likes to feel, feeling powerful. And then they could get into an altercation or something, and, their life could really fall apart pretty quickly. And, this is why it's important to understand those underlying dynamics. The 8 needs to stop looking, according to Ichazo, the 8 needs to stop looking everywhere for justice. That's something that they're obsessed with, and they try to get it, and they think they can get it, and it's like a little dangling carrot, and they think, oh, I'm going to get that, that's justice, I can have fairness, and they go for it, and they harm themselves, they harm other people, they go for vengeance. So it's a total trap, and it leads to repeated suffering. I mean, these are all cycles of suffering. So the one that's your core fixation, you're going to identify with more. You'll have other 2 fixations, those are going to be there as well, but the core is the one that is like, this is what made my life fall apart. Like, this is the part I play in my own undoing. This is the trick I'm playing on myself. And it can help us. It can help us get out of bad situations. It can help us stop ourselves in the act, but we need to be highly conscious of it and highly aware. With the 8, excess is a fixation of the 8. It's good we talk about the 8 actually, because the 2 and the 8 are connected by the lines, which, in Ichazo's original version, they didn't talk at all about direction of integration and disintegration. There were simply lines on the diagram, and they were there from Gurdjieff, and they were there from whoever knows how long, at least from Gurdjieff. And so we don't really know, which way the directions go, or even what those mean. This was something Riso and Hudson projected, these disintegration, integration things. I personally feel that it shows a relationship and a connection between the types, but many of us agree that it's not so well spelled out, and the more open-ended you can be about it, the better. I personally feel it helps to understand relationships between the types. Similarities, the 8 and the 2 do have a connection. They're connected by virtue of independence, and the 8s often will try to connect with others and to offer people something as a way of getting what they feel is theirs, as a way of getting justice. They understand the game of the 2. They understand that you have to give to get on some level. And they can be very giving, loving people once they realize that. But they're so focused on justice and revenge that they can't just give to others selflessly. It doesn't come naturally to them. To them, that's fake. That's disingenuous. And that's not really justice. That's just kind of a lie, because the image types, the heart types, they kind of come up with this story in some ways that's a lie about who they are. They come up with the false self. and they can be very narcissistic. And the 2 paints this kind of false narrative about, hey, I'm the independent one, I'm here to help you, and it's all kind of BS. It's not reality. Whereas the 8, at least they think that they're focused on some external justice. Sure, it's BS. I mean, often it's not objective, right? It's just kind of my way or the highway, or what I want or what I see and other people don't see. It's very subjective. But to them, they feel, hey, this is objective, moral, detached from me. It's not an image thing. It's not about me flattering anybody. The 8 has the sin of lust, and lust is just like wanting something so much and wanting to go after it, and being addicted to it, being, it's symbolized in sexual desire and taking over somebody, and that kind of predatory, like full-on orgasmic, immersing yourself in life. It's just a very, very intense, full sin. Very different from some of the other sins. There's a reason why these sins were chosen. So with the 8, you get a lust. It's like the lust feeds the 8 feels that they only have justice if they can have their lust satisfied. It's like they have these huge appetites. They could be addicted to sex, drugs, money, high speed. It's all about addiction to intensity. They can be addicted to all these things, and they're always looking to get their needs met, and they just want more and more and more. And it can become a really destructive thing, because as they do that, they become more raging. They become like more of a raging bull as they disintegrate. They become more aggressive. Their vengeance comes out even more strongly, and their idea of justice becomes even closer and closer connected to lust and to excess. So they kind of shift something that starts out as, hey, everything's just fair, we're good here, to pushing a little bit more to, well, okay, what's fair? I want to get what I want out of life, right? I want a good life. I want to have everything. I want to have what I deserve. So they keep pushing for more and more and more. And so that's kind of how the 8 operates. And it does follow from those original, those, the ego X and the over X, the passions of the types, and so on and so forth. So, all right, hope this helps. Talk to you later.